We often assume that we see the world as it is, objectively, neutrally, as passive observers registering reality. But Buddhist psychology gently and radically suggests otherwise. It teaches that we don't perceive reality directly. We perceive our own mind reflecting upon it. Our experiences are not fixed external truths. They are filtered through layers of memory, emotion, expectation, and habit. The world we experience is a projection, not a photograph. This simple but profound truth is both liberating and humbling. If we can begin to understand that our suffering often arises not from reality itself, but from how we perceive it, then we can begin to find freedom, not by changing everything outside us, but by transforming our relationship with what we see. The Buddha often spoke of the mind as a mirror, but not a passive mirror, one clouded by dust, distorted by waves of craving and aversion, fogged by ignorance. In this metaphor, our task is not to shatter the mirror, but to polish it. To see clearly, we must learn to notice what obscures our view. We must notice how quickly the mind leaps into interpretation, labeling something as good or bad, desirable or threatening, pleasurable or painful. We must see how easily a comment becomes an insult, a silence becomes rejection, a delay becomes evidence of failure, not because of what actually happened, but because of the meaning we added to it. This is the power of perception. In Buddhist terms, this process is rooted in sanya, perception, and sankhara, mental formations or fabrications. These are not flaws, they're part of the architecture of mind. The mind constructs meaning, that's what it does. But without awareness, we live inside those constructions as if they were the whole world. And when we suffer, we rarely question the frame through which we're seeing. We only try harder to change the picture. We believe the story instead of examining the storyteller. This is where mindfulness begins to offer its first gift, a gap, a pause. A moment of noticing the process instead of being consumed by its content. For example, we might find ourselves lost in thought, replaying a conversation that left us feeling uneasy. We assume the discomfort is caused by the words spoken, but what if it's actually our interpretation of those words? What if the feeling of "they don't respect me" is not a fact, but a perception colored by old wounds, shaped by earlier experiences, or born from internal insecurity? This isn't to say there's no truth in how we feel, but that our feelings, while real, are not always accurate reflections of what is. Buddhist psychology does not dismiss the mind. It seeks to understand its workings with clarity and compassion. The mind is not the enemy, it is simply conditioned. Like water taking the shape of its container, the mind takes the shape of our habits. These habits, the way we interpret a look, a pause, a word, are not random. They are shaped by our past, especially our early relational environments. If we grew up feeling unsafe, unseen, or unworthy, we're more likely to interpret neutral events as threats. Not because we are irrational, but because our nervous systems have been wired to expect harm. In modern psychology, this is often referred to as schema theory or attachment theory. In Buddhist terms, it is karma, not in the simplistic sense of punishment or reward, but in its literal meaning, action and habit. Karma is not something we're doomed by. It is something we repeat until we see it clearly enough to interrupt the cycle. The mirror of the mind can be distorted by many things: fear, desire, shame, pride, restlessness, doubt. Each of these is seen as one of the kilesas, mental defilements or obscurations. These are not sins, but misunderstandings. They cloud the mind and give rise to distorted views. Take desire, for example. When we want something badly, approval, success, love, recognition, we begin to interpret the world in ways that confirm or threaten that desire. We see people as obstacles or sources of gratification. We overestimate what we think will make us happy and underestimate the cost of chasing it. Likewise, when aversion is strong, we see the world through a lens of threat. Everything becomes a potential danger. We interpret others' actions as attacks, even when they're benign. We brace ourselves against life rather than meeting it openly. In this way, the mind becomes like a funhouse mirror, exaggerating some things, minimizing others. And the more we trust this distorted image, the more we suffer. Buddhist psychology teaches us that liberation comes not from trying to fix the world reflected in the mirror, but from realizing the distortion of the mirror itself. It is not about denying our perceptions, but about holding them lightly, examining them, and learning not to take them as ultimate truth. This is where the practice of satipatthana, the four foundations of mindfulness, becomes a tool of profound transformation. When we practice mindfulness of the body, feelings, mind states, and mental objects, we begin to see how quickly perception turns into reaction. A sensation arises, tightness in the stomach, and is followed by the perception something is wrong. A feeling of sadness comes, and the thought I'm broken follows. A memory flashes, and suddenly we are reliving the past as if it's happening now. But when we bring mindfulness to the moment, we interrupt this automatic chain. We can notice tightness in the belly, feeling of fear, thought of failure. And in that noticing, we step outside the loop. We become the observer, not the prisoner of our experience. This doesn't mean detaching from life in a cold, clinical way. On the contrary, it means becoming more intimate with life, seeing things more clearly, feeling more deeply, responding more skillfully. When we recognize that our mind is shaping our experience, we don't stop engaging with life. We simply engage with it more wisely. We pause before reacting. We ask, is this true? We begin to recognize our projections, our patterns, our habitual filters. And in doing so, we create room for other possibilities, for different interpretations, for compassion, for curiosity. Over time, this awareness can dismantle even our most deeply held assumptions. We begin to question not only our perceptions of others, but our perception of ourselves. We see that the inner critic, for example, is not the voice of truth, but a mental formation. A voice we internalized, often early in life, in an attempt to stay safe, be accepted, or avoid punishment. Buddhist psychology invites us not to argue with this voice, but to see it clearly, to ask, who is speaking here, and do I have to believe them? This is where real healing begins. When we realize that so much of our suffering comes not from external reality, but from the stories we tell ourselves about that reality. These stories are powerful. They are often unconscious, but they are not unchangeable. And when we bring them into awareness, they begin to loosen. We realize that we are not our thoughts. We are the awareness that sees the thoughts. We are not the mirror's distortions. We are the one polishing the glass. This shift in identity, from being the story to being the space in which the story unfolds, is one of the most profound gifts of the Dharma. It is not theoretical, it is experiential. It happens slowly, subtly, as we sit with ourselves in silence, as we notice our patterns in daily life, as we learn to pause before reacting. It happens when we catch ourselves mid-thought and smile, recognizing the old script playing once again. It happens when we realize we don't have to believe everything we think, and in that moment, we are free. The mirror begins to clear. We start to see others more clearly too, not as characters in our projections, but as beings with their own inner lives, their own perceptions, their own wounds. Compassion grows, patience deepens. Judgment softens. We begin to respond to the world, not from fear or habit, but from presence. This is not perfection. The mirror will cloud again. The mind will distort again. But now we know how to return. Now we have tools. Now we know the distortion is not the final truth. It's just a passing wave on the surface of the mind. Beneath it there is stillness. There is clarity. There is a mirror that, when polished, reflects the world with luminous simplicity. And perhaps the greatest revelation is this: that mirror is not something we have to create. It's something we remember. It's already here, always was, hidden beneath the dust of fear, longing, and confusion, waiting patiently to be seen. We spend our lives trying to answer the question, who am I? It's a question that hides behind everything: our choices, our relationships, our ambitions, our shame. We construct identities to anchor ourselves in the world. I am successful, I am a failure, I am anxious, I am spiritual, I am broken, I am a healer, I am unworthy, I am powerful. These labels become not just descriptions, but definitions. We don't just feel sadness, we say, I am depressed. We don't just struggle with a relationship, we say, I am unlovable. Over time, these words harden into a self-image. That self-image becomes our home, even if it hurts to live there. But what if the self we are trying to fix or improve or escape is not a solid thing at all? What if it is more like a flame, dynamic, shifting, dependent on conditions, than like a stone, fixed and permanent? In Buddhist psychology, the self is not rejected, but radically reimagined. The Buddha taught that what we call self is a process, not a possession. It's not something we have or are, but something we enact moment by moment. Like a song that emerges only while the instruments are playing, the self arises from the interplay of body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness, the 5 khandhas or aggregates. Together, they create the experience we call me, but none of them, alone or combined, is a fixed identity. This teaching is known as anatta, not self. It is one of the most subtle and misunderstood aspects of the Dharma. It doesn't mean we don't exist or that our experiences aren't real. It means that the solid, separate, independent self we imagine, the one who is always the same, who owns experiences, who stands outside of change, does not exist in the way we think it does. We are not nouns, we are verbs. A person is not a thing but a happening. At first, this may sound destabilizing. If there's no fixed self, what do we hold on to? How do we navigate life? Who is even practicing mindfulness? But slowly, as we live with this teaching, it becomes not disorienting, but liberating. If the self is a process, it means we are not stuck. We are not doomed to repeat our patterns. We are not locked in our pain. It means that transformation is not just possible, it is already happening. We are always becoming, always unfolding, always in motion. We see this clearly when we look closely at experience. Think of a moment of anger. In the heat of it, we say, I am angry, as if anger is who we are. But what is really happening? A sensation arises. Heat in the chest, a flush in the face. Thoughts appear. They shouldn't have done that. A story takes shape. People always treat me this way. And that collection of sensations, thoughts, and stories is wrapped into a single identity, angry person. But the anger itself is not solid. It has no core. It is a storm that moves through. And if we don't cling to it, if we simply witness it, it eventually fades. This is true of every state. Anxiety, shame, pride, doubt, they are all visitors, not residents. But we make them permanent by identifying with them. Buddhist psychology invites us to shift that habit. Instead of I am anxious, we say anxiety is arising. Instead of I am a failure, we say thoughts of failure are passing through the mind. This subtle shift creates space. It reminds us that we are not the contents of consciousness. We are the awareness in which those contents appear. This awareness is not personal in the way we usually think. It is not owned by a self. It is more like open space, clear, receptive, ungraspable. And when we rest in that awareness, even for a moment, we taste a freedom that cannot be found by trying to improve the self. We discover that we don't have to become someone else to be whole. We simply have to stop clinging to who we think we are. And yet, paradoxically, we still need a sense of self to navigate the world. We still say I and me. We still have preferences, memories, roles. Buddhist psychology does not deny this relative self. It simply asks us not to mistake it for something absolute. Like a mask in a play, the self is useful, but it's not the actor. It's a role we play, and sometimes forget we're playing. The trouble begins not when we have a self, but when we believe it's all we are. This is why the Buddha taught the middle way, a path between extremes. On one side, eternalism, the belief in a permanent, unchanging soul or essence. On the other, nihilism, the belief that nothing matters because nothing is real. The Dharma walks a third path, recognizing that the self is dependently originated. It arises from causes and conditions. It is real in experience, but not ultimately real. Like a rainbow, it appears vividly, but has no substance. Understanding this allows us to meet ourselves with more compassion. If the self is a process, then everything we struggle with, our anxiety, our addictions, our defensive patterns, is also part of that process. Not fixed traits, but conditioned tendencies. Not flaws in a broken self, but karmic momentum unfolding through time. And because they are conditioned, they can be changed. This is the heart of Buddhist psychology. What is conditioned can be unconditioned. What is constructed can be deconstructed. What is tangled can be untangled. With mindfulness, effort, and care, this untangling happens slowly. At first, we begin to notice the obvious identifications. I am a failure, I am too much, I am not enough. We start to question their truth. We see that these beliefs often come from childhood, from trauma, from culture, not from some essential truth about who we are. Then we begin to notice more subtle forms of clinging, our attachment to being good, being spiritual, being right. These too are identities we protect, often unconsciously. And when they are threatened, when someone criticizes us or we make a mistake, we feel it as a threat to self, not just to reputation, but to being. But if we can sit with that discomfort without defending, something shifts. We see that we don't need to be perfect. We don't need to prove ourselves. We don't need to construct an identity to be loved. The more we loosen our grip on self-image, the more space we have for authenticity, for learning, for connection. We become less reactive because there is less to defend, less caught in comparison because there is no fixed self to measure, less prone to shame because there is no fixed identity to fail. This does not make us passive or indifferent. On the contrary, it allows us to engage more fully. When we're not busy defending an identity, we can respond to life directly. We can adapt, we can learn. We can apologize without losing dignity. We can succeed without becoming inflated. We can love without fear of losing ourselves. And we begin to see others differently too. We see that they are also processes, not fixed beings, but unfolding lives shaped by causes and conditions. This softens judgment, deepens empathy, makes forgiveness possible. We stop locking others into roles, villain, savior, failure, threat, and begin to meet them anew in each moment. We recognize their conditioning, their suffering, their impermanence. And in that recognition, we glimpse the shared human experience, the tender, ever-changing dance of becoming. This insight is not something we grasp once and for all. It is something we return to again and again, in moments of stillness, in moments of pain, in meditation, in conversation. We remember this too is passing. This too is not who I am. This too is a wave in the ocean, and I am not just the wave. I'm also the water. Slowly, we begin to live from that awareness. We hold the self lightly, like a garment we wear for a time. We let go of the need to be someone and discover the joy of simply being. And in that being, we find something deeper than identity, a stillness, a clarity, a kindness that was never born and will never die. Not a self, but a presence. Not a thing, but a knowing. And that knowing, the Buddha said, is the beginning of freedom. There is a moment in every human life when the question becomes unavoidable. Why do I suffer? It may arise quietly as a whisper in the middle of an anxious night, or it may come as a desperate cry when everything falls apart. It is not a philosophical question then, but an urgent plea. Why does life hurt? Why does the mind race? Why do we keep doing the things that harm us, even when we know better? This question is as old as consciousness, and for the Buddha, it was the doorway to awakening. The Buddha's genius lay not in offering abstract metaphysics, but in directly addressing this core human experience. His first teaching after enlightenment was simple, profound, and universal. There is suffering, dukkha, and it has causes. This was not a message of pessimism, but one of precision. If suffering has a cause, it is not random. If it's not random, it can be understood. And if it can be understood, it can be transformed. What the Buddha pointed to over and over was that suffering doesn't come from life itself. It comes from the way we relate to life. More specifically, it comes from our craving, tanha, our relentless grasping for what we want, and our resistance to what we don't. This craving, he said, is not just about physical desire, it's deeper than that. It's the tight fist of the mind, the constant leaning toward, pulling away, pushing against, holding on. It is the refusal to be with things as they are. We crave pleasure, comfort, certainty, status, love, control. We push away pain, loss, boredom, aging, rejection, discomfort. We are caught in a loop of attraction and aversion, clinging and resistance. And in that loop we suffer. Not because pleasure is bad or pain is wrong, but because we are identified with a self that wants reality to conform to its preferences. And reality, being what it is, does not obey. This loop of suffering is not just a metaphor. It is something we can observe directly, moment to moment. Take a simple example. You feel uncomfortable, a restlessness, a vague unease. The mind immediately searches for a way to escape it. Maybe it reaches for your phone. Maybe it starts planning, worrying, fantasizing. There is a craving, make this go away or turn this into something better. And if the escape doesn't work, frustration arises, more suffering. If it does work, briefly, then craving arises again to keep it going. And around it goes, the mind grasping, rejecting, chasing, resisting. This is dukkha. Not just suffering in the obvious sense, but a pervasive dissatisfaction, a subtle discontent that runs beneath even our happiest moments. It's the fear that something is missing, or that it won't last, or that we'll lose it, or that it's not quite enough. Even in joy, there is the shadow of impermanence. Even in achievement, the anxiety of sustaining it. Udukkha is the hunger behind craving. Not a flaw in our character, but a misunderstanding at the heart of consciousness. And it is fueled by a fundamental illusion, the belief that if we could just arrange things the right way, get the right job, partner, home, body, reputation, then we would finally feel whole. We would finally be at peace. But Buddhist psychology invites us to see that this wholeness is not found by controlling external conditions. Is found by letting go of the illusion that we need to control them in the first place. This is not about becoming passive, it's about seeing clearly. When we begin to investigate craving and aversion through mindfulness, we discover something surprising. The craving is often more painful than the absence of the thing we crave. The resistance is often more painful than the discomfort we're resisting. It's the tension, the contraction, the refusal to be with what is. That's where suffering breeds. For example, physical pain is difficult, but the mental resistance, this shouldn't be happening, I can't stand this, what if it gets worse, adds layers of suffering. Likewise, loneliness can hurt, but when we add the story, I'll always be alone, something's wrong with me, no one loves me, the pain compounds. Mindfulness allows us to see this process in real time, sensation followed by mental reaction, followed by identification, and then suffering. As we begin to observe this loop with care and curiosity, it starts to lose its power. We don't stop wanting things, but we stop being controlled by our wanting. We begin to distinguish between healthy desire and compulsive craving, between acting from wisdom and reacting from fear. The grip of tanha loosens, not by suppression but by understanding. One of the most powerful tools in this process is simply pausing. In the moment when craving arises, the impulse to check the phone, to say something hurtful, to numb out, to reach for something, we pause. We breathe, we feel. We ask, what is really happening right now? Not with judgment, but with interest. Craving, like fire, feeds on fuel. The fuel is unconsciousness. When we become conscious, the fire begins to burn out. But this takes practice and patience. The loops of craving and aversion are deeply conditioned. They live not just in the mind, but in the body, the nervous system, the emotional memory. They often trace back to our earliest experiences of care and neglect, safety and danger. We crave approval because we once felt unseen. We cling to control because chaos once overwhelmed us. These patterns are not wrong, they are adaptive. But if we don't examine them, they become prisons. This is why Buddhist psychology emphasizes yoniso manasikara, wise attention, not just watching the mind, but watching it with precision, with kindness, and with the intent to understand. When we bring wise attention to our experience, we begin to unlearn the belief that our well-being depends on grasping or avoiding. We begin to see that peace comes not from controlling life, but from relaxing into it. This insight is not theoretical. It is something we feel. There is a moment, perhaps during meditation or in the middle of a difficult conversation or walking in solitude, when we stop struggling just for a breath. We let the craving be there without acting on it. We let the discomfort be there without fleeing. And in that moment we taste freedom. Not the freedom of getting what we want, but the freedom of not needing to. That freedom is not ecstatic. It is quiet, grounded. It feels like coming home. Over time, this becomes more than a moment. It becomes a new way of living. We learn to notice the loop before it tightens. We recognize the whisper of craving before it turns into compulsion. We feel the surge of aversion before it turns into aggression. We intervene, not by suppression but by presence. We feel the urge and let it pass. We feel the pain and let it breathe. We stop running, we stop chasing. And in the stopping, we discover a vast stillness underneath. This stillness is not indifference. It is not numbing or detachment. It is intimacy with life. It is the ability to feel fully without being overwhelmed, to love fully without clinging, to act wisely without being driven by fear. The loop of dukkha is not broken by escaping life, but by entering it completely, with awareness, with compassion, with truth. And then suffering begins to shift. Not disappear entirely. Life still brings pain, loss, uncertainty. But the compulsive suffering, the added layer of reactivity, begins to dissolve. We learn to grieve without drowning, to feel fear without being frozen, to experience joy without trying to hold on to it. We participate in life, but we are not possessed by it. This is the freedom the Buddha spoke of, the freedom that comes not from changing the world, but from changing our relationship with it. And it begins with seeing clearly. Craving is not happiness. Resistance is not safety. Control is not peace. The more we see this, the more we trust the letting go. Not a dramatic renunciation, but 1,000 small releases. The exhale that follows the grasp, the softening that follows the push, the breath that brings us back to now. This is the path, not away from life, but into it. Not toward perfection, but toward presence. And in that presence, the loop begins to open. Suffering becomes teacher. Craving becomes insight. Aversion becomes compassion, and the heart, once clenched with desire and fear, begins to rest in its natural state, awake, open, and free. There is a moment between impulse and action, a narrow sliver of time, almost imperceptible, where choice lives. Most of us rush past it. We feel anger and lash out, feel fear and shut down, feel desire and reach. But mindfulness invites us into that space. It teaches us that the power to transform our life does not lie in changing the outer world, but in widening that pause, that breath of awareness between feeling and reaction. And in that breath, everything can change. This is the essence of mindfulness in Buddhist psychology. Sati, often translated as mindfulness, literally means to remember. But it's not merely remembering with the mind. It's a deep remembering of presence, of wholeness, of what is happening now without judgment. It is the return to what we so often forget, that we are here, in this moment, not lost in what was or what might be. It is the art of coming home. The modern world moves quickly. It rewards speed, multitasking, optimization. It tells us to keep going, to be productive, to always strive for more. In this landscape, pausing feels like weakness. Stillness feels like failure. And so we live breathlessly, disconnected from ourselves. We react instead of respond. We numb instead of feel. We interpret instead of observe. The nervous system remains on high alert. The mind loops endlessly, and suffering compounds. But mindfulness begins to unravel that cycle. It does not fix the world. It simply allows us to see it more clearly. And that clarity is healing. We begin to notice the first stirrings of discomfort before they harden into full-blown distress. We feel the tightening of the jaw, the quickening of the breath, the urge to speak or run or fix. And in noticing, we gain a choice. We do not have to obey the momentum of the mind. Leaping from branch to branch, restless, scattered. But he also taught that the mind could be trained, tamed, and made luminous, not through suppression or control, but through steady observation. The act of watching is itself transformative. Like a light in a dark room, mindfulness reveals what was hidden, not to judge, but to understand. And when we understand, we relate differently. This is especially powerful when it comes to emotions. So many of our emotional patterns are inherited, conditioned, and unconscious. We don't choose to be anxious, reactive, insecure, or angry. We default to those states because they've become familiar, even if they hurt. Mindfulness doesn't make those emotions disappear, but it changes our relationship to them. We begin to feel emotions as sensations in the body rather than facts about the world. Sadness becomes heaviness in the chest, not proof that something is wrong with us. Anxiety becomes fluttering in the stomach, not a sign of failure. We learn to feel, not fuse. This unfusing is essential. Most suffering does not come from pain itself, but from identification with pain. We don't just feel anger, we become an angry person. We don't just feel shame, we believe I am unworthy. These identities harden, and with them, the neural pathways of suffering deepen. But mindfulness allows us to step back and see, this is anger, not who I am. This is fear, not my identity. It breaks the trance of self. And this is not cold detachment. It is warm, embodied awareness. Mindfulness is not watching the mind like a scientist observing a specimen. It is watching like a mother watching her child, present, attentive, tender. The famous phrase in the Satipatthana Sutta is contemplating the body in the body, the feelings in the feelings. Not from outside, but from within. We don't analyze experience. We inhabit it fully, without adding anything extra. The extra is what causes suffering. The mental commentary, the stories, the comparisons, the judgments. Mindfulness invites us to lay that aside and just be with what is. To feel a single breath, not as a concept, but as life itself. To feel one step, one sound, one heartbeat, and to realize that this moment is enough. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. In this way, mindfulness becomes the foundation of all healing. It is not a technique to master, but a quality of being to cultivate. It opens us to reality without distortion, without defensiveness. And in that openness, wisdom arises. We begin to see patterns, how craving leads to grasping, how grasping leads to suffering, how letting go brings peace. This is not something someone else tells us, it's something we witness directly. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. This direct seeing changes the brain. Neuroscience now confirms what the ancient sages knew, that mindfulness reshapes neural pathways, strengthens emotional regulation, and cultivates resilience. But even beyond science, there is a deeper change. The heart becomes softer, the mind becomes clearer, the soul becomes lighter. Not because life becomes easier, but because we stop resisting it. Resistance is the great amplifier of suffering. When we say, this shouldn't be happening, we double the pain. When we say, I can't handle this, we disempower ourselves. Mindfulness invites a radical turn. Instead of resisting, we lean in. Not to indulge pain, but to embrace life as it is. This requires courage. It requires tenderness. But it also offers relief. The relief of not having to pretend, escape, or fix everything. Just being becomes enough. Over time, the pause becomes more than a technique. It becomes a refuge, a sacred space within where we can return again and again, in moments of joy and moments of despair. We learn to pause when someone speaks harshly to us, before reacting in kind. We pause when fear grips us, and breathe instead of flee. We pause in the face of craving, and choose presence over compulsion. These pauses are not dramatic. They are small, quiet acts of freedom, and they accumulate. Each pause weakens the momentum of old habits. Each breath disrupts the loop of suffering. Each moment of mindfulness plants a seed of awakening. And the more we pause, the more we notice life is not happening later. It is happening now, and the more we live now, the more spacious it becomes. Spaciousness is one of the great gifts of mindfulness. When we are caught in thought, the world contracts. The mind tunnels into problems, regrets, fears. But when we return to the body, to the senses, to this moment, the world opens. We hear the wind, we feel the ground, we see the light falling on the wall. This isn't poetic romanticism, it is a shift in perception. A return to the simplicity of being. And in that simplicity, something extraordinary happens. Gratitude arises. Not because everything is perfect, but because we are present enough to see what is beautiful. We notice the smile of a stranger, the texture of an orange peel, the kindness of a friend. We realize we've missed so much by not being here. And that realization is not guilt, it is motivation. To live more fully, to see more clearly, to love more deeply. This is the transformative power of mindfulness. It brings us into contact with what is, and in doing so brings us into contact with ourselves. Not the constructed self of roles and stories, but the alive presence beneath it all. The part of us that was never broken, never lost, never separate. The one who breathes and feels and knows. The one who pauses, and in that pause remembers what matters most. The great Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh said, "The present moment is filled with joy and happiness. If you are attentive, you will see it." This is not idealism, it is a practice, a discipline, a path. To choose this moment over distraction, to choose reality over fantasy, to choose awareness over habit, and in choosing to awaken. So we return again and again to the breath, the body, the now, not to escape life, but to enter it more fully, to feel it all, the joy, the sorrow, the confusion, the wonder, to walk gently, speak truthfully, listen deeply, to pause, not to stop living, but to start living more wisely. In that pause, we heal, not by changing what has happened, but by changing how we meet it, not by becoming someone new, but by remembering who we already are. And the path continues, one breath, one step, one sacred pause at a time. Emotions are not problems to be solved. They are experiences to be felt, understood, and eventually transmuted. But many of us are taught the opposite. The difficult emotions are signs of weakness, failure, or pathology. Anger is dangerous, fear is cowardly, sadness is self-indulgent, shame is something to be hidden. So we learn to suppress, deny, or bypass what we feel. We become afraid of our own inner life. We confuse emotional repression with emotional mastery. But Buddhist psychology sees emotions differently. It doesn't divide them into good and bad, acceptable and unacceptable. Instead, it treats emotions as part of the natural landscape of the human mind, weather systems that arise, pass, and transform. Emotions are neither enemies to fight nor gods to obey. They are messages, they are energy, they are mirrors, and most of all, they are impermanent. When we bring mindfulness to our emotions, we begin to relate to them not as fixed identities, but as processes. Anger is not who I am. It is something that arises due to causes and conditions. Fear is not the truth. It is a response to uncertainty. Shame is not a verdict. It is a reaction to a perceived failure to belong. Emotions are not final statements. They are questions. And mindfulness gives us the capacity to sit with those questions without rushing to answers. Take anger, for example. Most of us are taught to fear anger, to suppress it, deny it, or act it out destructively. But in Buddhist psychology, anger is seen as a form of suffering. It is not power but pain. It arises when something we value is threatened, when we feel unheard, disrespected, or powerless. And while anger can point to real injustice, when unexamined, it often becomes a mask for deeper vulnerability. Mindfulness allows us to unmask anger. Instead of exploding or imploding, we pause. We feel the heat in the body, the tension in the jaw, the thoughts racing through the mind. We recognize the familiar storylines. They always do this. I can't take this anymore. I need to defend myself. And in that recognition, we begin to soften. We ask, what is underneath this? What is this anger protecting? Often we find hurt, grief, fear. When we meet those layers with compassion, the anger no longer needs to escalate. It has been heard. This does not mean we become passive or accepting of harm. On the contrary, by separating the wisdom in anger from its reactive energy, we can respond more skillfully. We can speak clearly without aggression, set boundaries without shutting down, take action without becoming consumed. Anger in this way becomes a teacher, a messenger reminding us of our values, our wounds, and our strength. Fear, too, is a misunderstood emotion. In our culture, fear is often seen as weakness, something to overcome or ignore. But fear is part of the biological design of survival. It signals danger, yes, but it also signals vulnerability. It shows us where we feel unprepared, unsupported, or uncertain. And when we habitually avoid fear, we also avoid growth. Buddhist psychology teaches us to turn toward fear, not to indulge it, but to understand it. When fear arises, instead of immediately seeking distraction or control, we pause. We feel the tightness in the chest, the shallowness of breath, the urge to flee or freeze. And we name it, this is fear. Just naming begins to create space. We become the observer, not just the experiencer. And in that space, fear begins to change shape. Often, we discover that what we fear is not the situation itself, but our imagined failure to meet it. We fear being overwhelmed, abandoned, judged, or exposed. We fear that we are not enough. But mindfulness reveals something deeper, that fear is not proof of inadequacy, but a sign that we are touching the edges of our known self. Fear is the threshold of transformation. It is where the old self resists the new. With compassion, we can begin to breathe with our fear, to sit with it like a trembling child. We learn that fear doesn't need to be banished. It needs to be befriended. And in that friendship, courage arises. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act even while afraid. This is the courage of the awakened heart, a courage rooted in presence, not bravado. Then there is shame, perhaps the most painful and silencing of all emotions. Shame says not just, I did something wrong, but I am wrong. It isolates, it corrodes, it whispers that we are unworthy of love, connection, belonging. And because it thrives in silence, shame grows in the dark corners of our psyche, the parts we hide from others, and even from ourselves. Buddhist psychology doesn't pathologize shame. It meets it with profound tenderness. Shame, like all emotions, is seen as conditioned. It arises from unmet needs, cultural messages, family wounds. It is not the truth of who we are. It is the residue of how we've been seen, treated, or neglected. And the first step in healing shame is to bring it into the light. This is where mindfulness becomes revolutionary. When we sit quietly and allow shame to arise, when we stop running and simply witness the ache, the thoughts, the stories, something begins to shift. The shame is still there, but now it is being seen without judgment. And in that seeing, it begins to lose its grip. We realize that we are not our shame. We are the awareness that holds it. From this place, we can bring in self-compassion. We can speak to the wounded parts of ourselves the way a wise parent would speak to a frightened child. I see you. I know this hurts. You are not alone. You are not bad. You are loved. These are not affirmations to paper over pain. They are truths we begin to feel as we soften toward ourselves. And as shame dissolves, our natural dignity emerges, not pride, but authenticity. We become more real. Other difficult emotions arise too: jealousy, resentment, guilt, despair. Each one has its own texture, its own message, its own path to healing. Buddhist psychology doesn't offer quick fixes. It offers a way to stay with what is, with kindness and curiosity, to recognize that beneath every difficult emotion is a tender truth, a longing, a hurt, a truth that needs attention. And in staying, we discover something radical. Emotions are not our enemies. They are our teachers. They point to where we are stuck, where we are growing, where we need care. They show us what matters. And when we stop fearing them, we stop fearing ourselves. Over time, we develop emotional fluency. We no longer need to react to every feeling. We don't have to suppress them or act them out. We can feel fully and choose wisely. This is true maturity. Not being emotionless, but being emotionally free. The freedom does not lie in controlling what arises. It lies in how we relate to what arises. We can be angry and still be kind. We can be afraid and still be present. We can feel shame and still act with dignity. This integration of awareness, compassion, and action is the heart of the Dharma. It is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming whole. And so we continue to sit, to breathe, to feel, to welcome whatever comes, not because it is pleasant, but because it is real. We learn to trust our capacity to hold pain and not collapse, to hold joy and not cling, to meet life in all its wildness and remain steady. This is the promise of Buddhist psychology, that within the storm of emotion lies a still point, a center that cannot be broken, a knowing that cannot be erased. And each time we return to that center, we remember we are not our pain. We are not our past. We are the one who knows, the one who stays, the one who heals. There is a softness beneath all the sharp edges of our pain. Beneath the armor of anger, the tight grip of fear, the heavy fog of shame, there is a quiet yearning. A yearning to be held, to be seen, to be loved as we are. Buddhist psychology recognizes this not as weakness, but as our deepest truth. It teaches that the heart, when unburdened by conditioning and confusion, naturally inclines toward compassion, and that this compassion, tender, clear, unforced, is the very medicine that heals the mind. But for many of us, compassion does not come easily. We may show it to others, but withhold it from ourselves. Or we may fear that compassion means being soft, weak, or permissive. Some of us have been hurt so deeply that the idea of opening the heart feels dangerous. We build fortresses of control, cynicism, or isolation to keep ourselves safe. And in doing so, we cut ourselves off from the very force that could free us. The Buddha taught that compassion, karuna, is not sentimental or emotional. It is not pity, it is not codependence. It is the natural response of a heart that is awake to suffering, our own and others. It is a movement toward, not away, a willingness to be present, to care, to act when needed, and to forgive when possible. Compassion does not demand perfection. It arises from the recognition that we all hurt, we all try, and we all long for peace. The starting place is often the hardest, self-compassion. Many spiritual seekers find this the most difficult task of all. We strive to be kind, forgiving, and patient with others, yet we speak to ourselves with harshness, blame, and criticism. The inner voice says things we would never say to someone we love. You're not good enough. You should have known better. What's wrong with you? This inner harshness is not inherent. It is learned. It often comes from early conditioning. Environments where love was conditional, where mistakes were punished, where vulnerability was not safe. Over time, we internalize those voices. We believe that self-criticism will make us better, that if we let ourselves off the hook, we will spiral into laziness or selfishness. But Buddhist psychology and modern research tells us the opposite. Compassion is not indulgence, it is strength. To practice self-compassion is not to excuse our harmful actions. It is to see them clearly and respond with honesty and care. It is to say, yes, I made a mistake, and I am still worthy of kindness. Yes, I'm struggling, and I deserve care. Yes, I am imperfect, and I do not need to be punished for it. This is not weakness, this is healing. Mindfulness is essential in this process. It allows us to notice the voice of the inner critic without fusing with it, to recognize the painful narratives that replay in our minds. With mindfulness, we can hear the thought, I'm a failure, and instead of believing it, we can say, this is a moment of suffering. That simple phrase creates space. It shifts us from identification to observation. And in that space, compassion becomes possible. One powerful practice from Buddhist psychology is metta, loving-kindness meditation. It begins by directing phrases of goodwill toward ourselves. May I be safe. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I live with ease. At first, this may feel mechanical or even dishonest. But over time, something begins to soften. We realize that we are simply planting seeds, and even if they don't bloom right away, the soil is being tilled. As self-compassion deepens, it naturally extends outward. We begin to see others not as objects or obstacles, but as fellow humans with tender hearts, hidden wounds, and the same longing to be free. Even those who have hurt us begin to be seen differently. This does not mean we condone harm or bypass justice, but we see that those who cause pain are themselves in pain. That hatred is not strength but suffering in disguise. This insight is not abstract. It changes how we relate to friends, partners, strangers, even enemies. When someone speaks to us harshly, we no longer have to mirror that harshness. We can pause, feel the sting, and respond from presence. We may choose to speak firmly, to walk away, or to forgive, but we do so with awareness, not reactivity. This is what Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron calls not biting the hook. Compassion gives us the space to respond instead of react, to stay connected to our values even when triggered, to hold the truth that all beings are doing the best they can with the consciousness they have in the moment, even when that best is very limited. And compassion is not passive, it fuels wise action. It motivates us to stand up for justice, to care for the vulnerable, to speak out against cruelty. But it does so without hatred. This is the balance of compassion and wisdom. We do not allow our hearts to be hardened by anger, but neither do we close our eyes to suffering. We walk the middle path, steady, open, and engaged. This path leads naturally to what the Buddha called the boundless states, the four immeasurables: loving kindness, metta; compassion, karuna; empathetic joy, mudita; and equanimity, upekkha. Together, they form the architecture of an awakened heart. Compassion is not separate from these. It flows into them and from them. Empathetic joy, for example, allows us to celebrate the happiness of others without envy or comparison. This may seem unrelated to compassion, but it is deeply connected. When we are compassionate toward ourselves, we no longer feel threatened by the success or joy of others. We see it as part of the shared human good. We feel with them, we rejoice. Equanimity, meanwhile, gives compassion its depth and steadiness. Without equanimity, compassion can burn out into pity, overwhelm, or codependence. Equanimity reminds us that we are not here to fix everything, but to meet what arises with balance and care. It is the wisdom that holds compassion when the world feels too heavy to bear. Together, these qualities form the heart of engaged presence. We don't turn away from suffering, nor do we become consumed by it. We walk into the fire with a calm heart and an open hand. We trust that the heart is resilient, that love is not a finite resource, and that even the smallest act of kindness matters. This is not a spiritual ideal. It is a lived reality. It happens in the quiet moments, when we choose patience over irritation, presence over judgment, a kind word over silence. It happens when we sit with our own grief without rushing to fix it, when we listen to someone's pain without offering advice, when we see someone we dislike and silently wish them peace. Compassion is not always dramatic, it is often invisible, but its effects ripple outward. One softened heart softens another. One gentle word dissolves tension. One act of forgiveness ends a cycle of harm. We don't need to be saints to make a difference. We just need to be willing to care. And in the end, the one who benefits most from compassion is ourselves. When we stop fighting against our own suffering, when we stop hardening our hearts to stay safe, we become more alive. The armor drops, the breath deepens, the inner war ends, and we remember what it feels like to be whole. This is the healing power of compassion, not as an idea, but as a way of living. It teaches us to hold suffering without collapsing, to feel deeply without drowning, to act wisely without losing our center. It reminds us that love is not a reward for perfection, but the ground of our being. And it is always available, right now in this moment, in this breath, in this body, in this heart even now. Letting go is often misunderstood. It is not indifference, it is not resignation. It is not about walking away from life or withdrawing from love. Letting go, in the language of Buddhist psychology, is a quiet, courageous surrender, not to defeat, but to the truth of impermanence. It is the inner gesture of non-attachment, a willingness to meet life fully, but not cling to its changing forms. It is what allows the heart to remain open in a world where everything eventually changes, fades, or ends. The Buddha identified clinging, upadana, as one of the central causes of suffering. We cling to pleasure, to identity, to control, to relationships, to views, to certainty. We reach for permanence in a world of flux. And when what we cling to inevitably shifts, when people leave, bodies age, plans unravel, we feel betrayed. But it is not life that betrays us. It is our misunderstanding of its nature. Non-attachment, then, is not about having nothing. It's about being free in the midst of everything. It's the difference between holding a bird gently in your hands, knowing it may fly away, and gripping it so tightly that you harm it in your desperation to make it stay. When we let go, we are not loving less. We are loving more clearly, without trying to possess what cannot be possessed. This distinction becomes especially important in relationships. Much of what passes for love in the modern world is infused with attachment. I need you to complete me. If you leave, I'll fall apart. You belong to me. But Buddhist psychology invites us to a radical reframe. It asks, what would it mean to love without ownership? To offer presence instead of possession? To let others be free, even if that means they don't stay? Letting go does not mean not caring. It means caring deeply without entanglement. It means being fully present with someone, listening, supporting, loving, while allowing them their autonomy. It means saying, I want what's best for you, even if that's not me. And this is one of the greatest acts of compassion, both toward ourselves and others. We stop trying to control outcomes. We stop bargaining with life. We start living in alignment with truth. But the path of non-attachment is not easy. It asks us to sit with grief, with uncertainty, with the ache of impermanence. It asks us to feel loss fully, not bypass it, not numb it, not spiritualize it, but to let it carve its wisdom into our hearts. Because when we stop resisting change, change becomes a teacher. Mindfulness is essential in this process. When we feel the pull of attachment, the gripping, the needing, the obsessing, we pause, we breathe. We notice the sensations in the body, the tightness in the chest, the buzzing in the mind, the craving in the belly. We label it, this is clinging. And in naming it, we begin to release its grip. What's revealed beneath clinging is often fear. Fear of emptiness, fear of being alone, fear of meaninglessness. And yet, paradoxically, when we stop clinging and turn toward that fear with presence, we find it's not as solid as we thought. It's like a ghost, terrifying when unseen but harmless when met with light. We realize that emptiness is not void, but spaciousness. That aloneness is not abandonment but freedom. That letting go is not loss but peace. One of the most powerful teachings in Buddhist psychology is the truth of anicca, impermanence. Everything that arises will pass. Every thought, every mood, every joy, every sorrow. This is not a reason for despair, but a gateway to liberation. If we truly internalized impermanence, we would stop clinging to what will inevitably change. We would stop trying to freeze time or control people. We would meet life with openness, humility, and gratitude. And we would grieve more honestly, because grief is not the opposite of letting go, it is part of it. When something precious ends, a relationship, a season of life, a dream, it is natural to mourn. Buddhist psychology honors this. It invites us to grieve with mindfulness, not as a failure to let go, but as a deep expression of love. To cry fully, to remember fully, to feel the loss fully, without turning it into identity or story. Eventually, grief softens, and in its place arises a quieter joy, a joy that comes from no longer resisting what is. This joy is not the high of getting what we want. It is the serenity of not needing everything to go our way. It is the contentment of being aligned with reality. This is the fruit of letting go, a heart that is open, a mind that is free, a spirit that is unburdened. But how do we let go in practice? Sometimes it means physically releasing. putting down the phone, walking away from a toxic situation, decluttering our space. Sometimes it means internal release, forgiving someone, letting go of a grudge, or releasing the need to prove ourselves. Sometimes it means sitting in silence and simply noticing the mental grasping without feeding it. We don't always have to force letting go. Often it's more about allowing, letting be, rather than pushing away. This is especially true with emotions. Trying to force ourselves not to feel something, jealousy, anger, fear, only entangles us further. But if we can sit with the emotion, breathe with it, feel it in the body without clinging or resistance, something magical happens. It moves, it changes, it completes its arc. Emotions are like waves. They rise, crest, and fall. It is only when we fight them that we drown. Letting go also applies to our identities. We cling to who we think we are. I'm the smart one. I'm the victim. I'm the fixer. I'm the failure. These identities become prisons. Buddhist psychology teaches the radical idea of anatta, not self. It doesn't mean we don't exist, but that the self is not fixed, not permanent, not a solid thing. When we loosen our grip on identity, we open to new ways of being. We become more fluid, more alive. Non-attachment, then, is not detachment. It is full engagement without fixating. It is loving without clinging. Acting without needing control. Living without needing guarantees. It is the middle way between indulgence and avoidance. We don't suppress desire or ambition or love. We just hold them more lightly. We trust the flow of life more than the illusion of control. This does not make us passive. On the contrary, it makes us more responsive. When we are not attached to a fixed outcome, we can act with more clarity and creativity. We are not paralyzed by fear or obsessed with success. We do what we can with what we have from a place of presence, and we let the results go. This is the freedom of wise action. In the end, letting go is not something we do once. It is a practice, a rhythm, a way of walking through the world. We let go of one breath and welcome the next. We let go of expectations and discover surprise. We let go of yesterday's self and meet who we are today. We let go of control and step into trust. And each time we let go, we come home. To the simplicity of now, to the spaciousness of being, to the truth that we were never really separate from anything we tried to hold. We were simply trying to hold the river. But the river doesn't need to be held. It needs to be entered, flowed with, trusted. And so we let go again and again, not as a failure, but as an act of love. There is a moment, quiet and unmistakable, when spiritual practice stops feeling like something outside of life, a technique, a retreat, a book to be read, and begins to feel like life itself. The breath we take as we wait in traffic becomes part of the path. The pause before speaking a harsh word becomes part of the path. The smile we offer a stranger, the resilience we show ourselves after a difficult day, the way we let go of a grudge or admit a mistake, all of it becomes practice. This is the threshold of awakened living, the moment we begin to see, not just with our minds, but with our whole being, that the Dharma was never separate from daily life. Buddhist psychology offers profound insight into the causes of suffering and the path to its end. But insight alone is not enough. The purpose of this wisdom is not to become clever or serene or spiritual in some abstract sense. It is to live more fully, more honestly, more freely. The ultimate aim is not escape from the world, but deeper engagement with it, a way of showing up, awake and unarmored, in the everyday. To live the Dharma in daily life is not to seek perfection. It is to be present. It is to bring the principles of the path, mindfulness, compassion, non-attachment wisdom, into the messiness and beauty of ordinary moments. It is in how we wash the dishes, answer emails, raise our children, navigate heartbreak, face illness, and make difficult choices. Each of these becomes a temple. Each of these is the ground of awakening. Mindfulness, sati, is the thread that weaves it all together. Not just on the cushion, but throughout the day. We wake up and instead of reaching for our phone, we take a breath. We eat not as a chore or a distraction, but as an offering, feeling the texture of food, noticing when we're full. We listen to someone speak without rehearsing our reply. We notice how judgment arises, how blame flares, how craving moves through the body like wind. And we don't try to stop it all. We simply notice over and over, with patience, with humor. With humility. This is not performance. It is presence, and in that presence, a subtle transformation begins. We start to feel less like life is happening to us, and more like we are participating in its unfolding, consciously, gently, wisely. But awakened living is not only about attention. It is also about intention. The Buddha spoke often of satana, the motivation behind our actions. Are we acting out of greed or generosity? Fear or love? Habit or awareness? This inquiry brings ethics into every moment, not as rigid rules, but as a compass. When we remember to ask, what is my deepest intention here? We begin to align our behavior with our deepest values. This alignment is where peace is found, not in the absence of problems, but in the coherence between our inner truth and outer actions. When we lie, even in small ways, we feel the fracture. When we betray ourselves to please others, we feel the dissonance. But when we act with integrity, even when it's hard, we feel a quiet dignity, the kind of self-respect that no praise or success can replace. Compassion becomes our default setting, not just for others, but for ourselves. We catch the moment we begin to spiral into shame, and we place a gentle hand on the heart. We remember that growth takes time, that old patterns unravel slowly, that even in our missteps we are worthy of kindness. And from this inner gentleness, outer kindness flows more naturally. We judge less, we listen more. We stop trying to fix everyone and start being with them. This shift changes our relationships. No longer driven by unconscious craving or fear, we begin to show up with more openness and honesty. We express our needs without blame. We listen to others' truths without defensiveness. We set boundaries not as walls, but as bridges, invitations to meet in mutual respect. We stop trying to control others and instead tend to our own mind, our own reactions. This is the foundation of true connection. Awakened living also includes how we relate to time. In a world that glorifies speed and productivity, Buddhist psychology invites us to slow down, to remember that each moment is complete, not a stepping stone to something better. We stop waiting for life to begin after the next thing. We start living it now, in the midst of laundry, traffic, and deadlines. Enlightenment is not a distant peak to reach. It is a quality of presence, available in this breath. This doesn't mean we become passive. Buddhist psychology is deeply engaged with the world. But our engagement shifts from reaction to response, from compulsion to clarity. We don't chase every impulse. We don't need to win every argument. We begin to move with intention, choosing where to place our energy, how to contribute, what to let go. This includes how we consume media, food, information, energy. Mindful consumption is a radical act in a culture of distraction. It means asking, does this nourish or deplete me? Does this align with the life I want to live? We realize that every act of consumption is also an act of creation. We are shaping our minds, our relationships, our world. Awakened living also means being with the world as it is, not turning away from suffering, but turning toward it with courage and care. We engage with injustice, not from rage, but from love. We act not to dominate or prove, but to serve. We bring mindfulness into activism, compassion into conflict, wisdom into complexity. This is not withdrawal, it is wise participation. And yet, for all its practices and principles, awakened living is also deeply simple. It is about presence, kindness, clarity, enoughness. It is the ability to sit with what is, a cup of tea, a difficult conversation, a moment of uncertainty, and meet it fully. No need to embellish or escape, just to be. And in that being, to remember this is it. This is life. This is where the path is. The awakened life is not always easy. It demands honesty. It dismantles illusions. It calls us to befriend discomfort, uncertainty, and even death. But it also offers joy, not the fleeting high of acquisition or approval, but the steady joy of belonging to reality, of knowing that we are not separate. of living from the center rather than the surface. We begin to see through the eyes of the Dharma, not as dogma, but as a deep inner vision. We see that pain is not punishment, but part of the fabric of change. That joy is not reward, but a natural fruit of alignment. That love is not something to earn, but something to recognize within ourselves, between each other, in every blade of grass and drop of rain. We no longer need to chase a perfect self. We start living from the whole self, flawed, human, and sacred. We walk through the world, not as someone seeking, but as someone remembering. We are not looking for life. We are already in it. And so we live, we stumble, we wake up, we forget, we return. And in this returning again and again, we are transformed, not into something other than human, but into someone more fully human. Someone who loves more deeply, listens more fully, gives more freely, and lives more lightly. This is the art of awakened living. This is the promise of the path. Not perfection, but presence. Not escape, but engagement. Not control, but communion. Not someday, but now.